Some people inherit fortunes. Others inherit silence. I inherited a heart so cold that even I believed nothing could ever change it. My name is Nathan Morelli, and by the age of 32, I had become everything my family expected. Every negotiation ended exactly the way I planned. Every decision carried the weight of generations before me. Every room fell silent when I entered, yet none of those victories ever made the mansion feel less empty when the doors closed behind me each night. The Morelli estate overlooked the Manhattan skyline from a hill lined with ancient oaks, its marble halls filled with priceless paintings, crystal chandeliers, and polished stone that reflected every careful step. Visitors admired its beauty. I only noticed the silence. That morning began like every other. Advisors reviewed charitable investments while attorneys organized contracts across an endless conference table. My assistant handed me the schedule for the annual literary preservation fundraiser sponsored by the Morelli Foundation. One item immediately caught my attention. A rare first edition would be delivered personally from a historic neighborhood library before the evening exhibition. I barely looked up. Rare books were important to the foundation, but they were still objects, carefully protected and professionally cataloged. Nothing more. An hour later, the massive front doors opened, allowing crisp autumn air to drift inside. I signed another document before hearing soft footsteps echo across the marble floor. When I finally looked toward the entrance, I saw her. She could not have been older than 24. She wore a simple cream cable knit sweater beneath a navy cardigan, carried a carefully protected archival case with both hands, and smiled politely at every employee she passed as though each greeting mattered. Her chestnut hair was loosely tied back, and the warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the grand windows rested gently across her calm hazel eyes. She did not seem intimidated by the enormous estate or the people surrounding her. She simply looked like someone who loved the responsibility she had been trusted to carry. My curator introduced her. "This is Olivia Carter from the Manhattan Historical Library." She offered her hand with quiet confidence. "It is an honor to help preserve this collection." Her voice carried no nervousness, no ambition, and no expectation. I accepted her handshake almost automatically, yet something unexpected happened in that brief moment. She looked directly into my eyes without hesitation, not searching for influence, not measuring my reputation, but seeing only another human being standing in front of her. The feeling disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind a strange silence inside my thoughts. Olivia carefully opened the protective case and revealed the beautifully preserved first edition. As she explained its history, her face brightened with genuine enthusiasm. Every word reflected love for knowledge rather than admiration for wealth. I realized I had stopped listening to the curator several minutes earlier. Instead, I found myself listening only to her. After the paperwork was completed, Olivia thanked every staff member individually before preparing to leave. She paused near the entrance, glanced back once with the same warm smile she had worn since arriving, and quietly walked into the golden autumn afternoon. The estate became silent again. Advisors resumed speaking. Phones rang. Meetings continued exactly as planned. Yet for the first time in years, I could not remember a single word anyone said, because somewhere beyond the iron gates, an ordinary librarian had unknowingly carried away the only thought that refused to leave my frozen heart. The following morning arrived wrapped in cool October air and brilliant sunlight that spilled across the Manhattan skyline. Yet my thoughts refused to return to the endless meetings waiting inside the Morelli estate. Every report looked the same. Every contract carried another decision. Every conversation sounded distant, as though my mind had quietly wandered somewhere no boardroom could follow. I tried convincing myself that Olivia Carter had simply been another visitor delivering another valuable book. That explanation should have been enough. Instead, I found myself remembering the calm confidence in her voice, the way she thanked every employee by name, and the genuine enthusiasm that appeared whenever she spoke about preserving history instead of impressing powerful people. Before noon, I surprised even myself by canceling one afternoon appointment. I instructed my driver to take me downtown, but asked him to stop several blocks away from the Manhattan Historical Library. I wanted to arrive unnoticed. The historic brick building stood beneath rows of maple trees whose golden leaves drifted gently onto the sidewalk. It looked modest compared with the estate, yet there was a warmth surrounding it that no amount of marble or crystal could imitate. I stepped inside, and the comforting scent of old paper, polished oak shelves, and freshly brewed coffee immediately welcomed me. Quiet conversations floated between towering bookcases while children gathered around a reading corner listening to a volunteer tell a classic American story. The peaceful atmosphere felt strangely unfamiliar. Olivia stood behind the circulation desk, organizing returned books with careful attention. When she looked up and recognized me, surprise briefly crossed her face before a warm smile naturally returned. "Good afternoon," she said. "I did not expect to see you here." I smiled slightly. "Neither did I." She laughed softly, the sound light enough to make the room feel even brighter. "Are you searching for something specific?" I looked around the endless shelves before answering honestly. "Perhaps I am searching for a recommendation." Her expression brightened immediately. She stepped from behind the desk and guided me through sections filled with American classics, biographies, and forgotten historical treasures. She spoke about authors with genuine affection, explaining how every book carried the heartbeat of someone brave enough to leave their story behind. I listened far more than I spoke. For the first time in years, nobody expected me to make a decision, approve a proposal, or solve a problem. I was simply another visitor learning from someone who loved her work. Eventually, Olivia removed a slightly worn novel from an upper shelf and carefully placed it in my hands. "This one has always reminded me that people are capable of changing, even when they believe they cannot," she said with a gentle smile. I studied the faded cover before looking back at her. "Do you truly believe that?" She nodded without hesitation. Every meaningful story begins when someone decides they do not have to remain the person they were yesterday. Those words settled quietly inside me long after our conversation ended. As I checked out the novel, Olivia thanked me for supporting the Foundation's preservation efforts, never mentioning my family name again. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, carrying the borrowed book beneath my arm, I realized I had entered the library hoping to understand why I could not stop thinking about one ordinary librarian. Instead, I walked away wondering whether she had already begun rewriting the story of my own life without even realizing it. 3 weeks passed beneath brilliant autumn skies, and before I realized how much had changed, visiting the Manhattan Historical Library had quietly become the most anticipated part of every week. I always found a practical excuse. Sometimes I returned a borrowed novel. Sometimes I searched for another recommendation. Sometimes I claimed I wanted to review historical collections for the Morelli Foundation. The truth was much simpler. I wanted another conversation with Olivia Carter. She never treated my visits as extraordinary. Every time I entered the library, she greeted me with the same sincere smile she offered every student, every retiree, and every child who walked through those old wooden doors. That consistency fascinated me more than admiration ever could. One crisp Thursday morning, Olivia received an official invitation from the Morelli Foundation asking her to assist with the annual Literary Heritage Exhibition. Because she had extensive experience preserving rare books, the foundation wanted her to oversee the historical collection throughout the event. When she arrived at the estate carrying carefully protected archival cases, the grand ballroom had already been transformed into an elegant exhibition hall. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while antique display cabinets stretched beneath warm lighting. Historians, university professors, philanthropists, museum curators, and civic leaders gathered quietly among priceless first editions, discussing literature instead of business. Olivia moved through the room with calm confidence, examining every display before gently adjusting the placement of several historic volumes. She spoke respectfully with museum staff, thanked every volunteer individually, and answered technical questions with impressive knowledge that immediately earned the admiration of experienced preservation specialists. I watched from across the ballroom while greeting arriving guests, but my attention repeatedly drifted toward her instead of the carefully planned event. Later that evening, an influential donor approached one of the displays where Olivia stood explaining the historical significance of a rare American novel. He smiled politely before saying, "I assumed the foundation would hire someone from a prestigious university rather than a neighborhood librarian." The ballroom grew noticeably quieter. Olivia remained perfectly composed. "Libraries preserve knowledge for everyone," she answered gently. Prestige may attract attention, but dedication protects history. Her voice carried neither anger nor defensiveness. It carried quiet conviction. Before the donor could respond, I walked toward them and smiled respectfully. Allow me to introduce the person responsible for ensuring every manuscript in this exhibition is displayed according to museum preservation standards. Miss Carter's expertise made tonight possible. I deliberately addressed her before acknowledging anyone else. Several historians immediately thanked Olivia for her remarkable work, shifting the conversation entirely toward her accomplishments. I noticed genuine surprise in her eyes as she looked toward me. She had not expected public recognition, and perhaps that was exactly why she deserved it. The remainder of the evening unfolded beneath warm conversation and quiet admiration. As the final guests prepared to leave, Olivia stood beside one of the illuminated display cases, watching visitors pause to appreciate stories written generations ago. I joined her without speaking. After several peaceful moments, she smiled softly and whispered, "Books have a wonderful way of bringing strangers together." I looked at the crowd one final time before answering honestly. Perhaps they do much more than that. For the first time in many years, I realized I was no longer measuring success by applause, influence, or achievement. Somewhere between rare books, quiet conversations, and one ordinary librarian, I had begun measuring my life by the moments that made my heart feel unexpectedly alive. The final guests slowly departed beneath a sky painted with deep shades of blue and gold, leaving the Morelli estate wrapped in an unusual stillness that felt far more peaceful than empty. Staff members quietly gathered display materials, while museum specialists carefully secured priceless first editions inside protective cases. Olivia remained focused on inspecting every collection one final time, gently adjusting a display card that had shifted only a fraction of an inch. Her attention to detail never changed, whether someone important was watching or whether the ballroom had nearly emptied. Curious, I remained nearby without announcing my presence. A few moments later, an elderly maintenance employee struggled to move a heavy wooden podium toward the storage room. Several event coordinators hurried past, occupied with finishing their own responsibilities before the evening ended. Without hesitation, Olivia set aside her catalog clipboard and walked directly toward the gentleman. "Please allow me to help," she said warmly. Together, they slowly guided the podium across the polished marble floor while quietly laughing about how every successful event depended upon countless people whose names rarely appeared in photographs. When they finally reached the storage room, the gentleman smiled gratefully. "Thank you," he said. "Most people only notice us when something goes wrong." Olivia shook her head gently. "The people working behind the scenes deserve to be noticed first." I stood silently only a few yards away, realizing she had no idea anyone had witnessed the entire exchange. There was no audience, no recognition, and nothing to gain. She simply chose kindness because it reflected who she truly was. After the maintenance employee left, I walked toward her carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. She accepted one with a surprised smile. "I thought everyone had already gone home," she said. I looked around the quiet ballroom, where crystal chandeliers continued reflecting across polished stone. Apparently not everyone. We stepped together onto the estate terrace overlooking gardens illuminated by elegant lanterns. Cool autumn air carried the scent of cedar trees and freshly fallen leaves, while the distant Manhattan skyline shimmered beneath the evening sky. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Finally, I turned toward her. "You helped him because you believed it was the right thing to do." Olivia rested her hands lightly upon the stone railing before answering. "Kindness only means something when it expects nothing in return." Her words settled deeply inside me. I had spent years surrounded by people measuring success through influence, reputation, and achievement. She measured it through simple choices nobody else noticed. After another thoughtful pause, I quietly admitted, "Most people introduce themselves to my family name before they ever try to know me." Olivia looked toward me with calm understanding rather than sympathy. Tonight, I met the man who thanked the maintenance employee before thanking the donors. I laughed softly, almost embarrassed by the unexpected compliment. That man rarely receives much attention. She smiled gently while watching lights flicker across the gardens. Perhaps he has simply never met someone willing to notice him. We remained there together beneath the clear autumn sky until the final estate lights began dimming one by one. As Olivia prepared to leave, I insisted on walking her to the front entrance instead of asking a member of my staff to escort her. She thanked me with the same sincere smile that had first captured my attention weeks earlier. As her car disappeared beyond the iron gates, I remained standing beneath the quiet lanterns, realizing that the strongest people are not always those who command the largest rooms. Sometimes they are the ones whose quiet compassion changes a heart without ever trying to conquer it. The days following the exhibition passed with quiet certainty, and before long, I found myself searching for reasons to visit the Manhattan Historical Library even when my schedule insisted I should be somewhere else. The city continued moving with its usual rhythm beneath brilliant autumn skies, but something inside me had begun changing at a pace no calendar could measure. Every conversation with Olivia left behind a calm that lingered long after I returned to the estate. One crisp afternoon, after I finished reviewing educational grants for the Morelli Foundation, an idea seemed perfectly reasonable. The foundation had recently expanded its historical preservation program, and we needed someone with exceptional knowledge of rare collections. There was no one more qualified than Olivia. I arranged a private meeting inside one of the library's quiet reading rooms, bringing only a simple envelope instead of an entourage or formal presentation. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of well-loved books while the gentle scent of paper and cedar surrounded us. Olivia greeted me with the same sincere smile she always wore. "You look as though you have something important to discuss," she said. I smiled slightly. "I hope so." After we settled across a wooden table, I placed the envelope in front of her. "The Morelli Foundation would like to offer you the position of Director of Historical Collections. You would oversee preservation projects across the city, work with museums and universities, and receive every resource you might ever need." Olivia carefully opened the envelope and quietly read every page without interruption. The room remained peaceful except for the soft turning of paper and the distant sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the reading hall. When she finished, she folded the documents neatly, placed them back inside the envelope, and gently slid it toward me. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I am deeply honored, but I cannot accept." Her answer surprised me far more than I expected. "May I ask why?" She looked around the familiar library before speaking. "Because this place trusted me long before anyone else knew my name. Every shelf, every reader, every child discovering a favorite book reminds me why I chose this life. If I ever leave, it must be because my heart leads me somewhere new, not because the salary is larger or the office is more impressive." I remained silent, absorbing every word. Throughout my life, people had accepted opportunities before I even finished presenting them. Olivia had done something completely different. She respected the offer while remaining completely faithful to herself. After a thoughtful pause, I quietly admitted, "I believed I was giving you something valuable." She smiled warmly. "You were. You gave me the opportunity to choose, and that is a gift by itself." I laughed softly, shaking my head with genuine admiration. "You continue teaching me lessons I never expected to learn." Olivia closed the envelope and returned it to my hands. The greatest opportunities are not always the ones that change our address. Sometimes they simply remind us who we already are. As I left the library carrying the unopened offer, I realized I felt no disappointment whatsoever. Instead, I carried something far more meaningful. For the first time in my life, I understood that integrity could never be purchased, loyalty could never be negotiated, and the woman who had quietly captured my attention was now reshaping every belief I once held about success, purpose, and the true measure of a remarkable life. By the time November surrendered to the first gentle days of December, Manhattan had begun dressing itself in soft white lights, evergreen wreaths, and the quiet excitement that always arrived before the holidays. The city looked different beneath the early winter sky, yet the greatest change had taken place somewhere inside me. I still attended board meetings. I still reviewed foundation reports and chaired charitable committees. The responsibilities had not disappeared. They simply no longer defined every hour of my life. Whenever my schedule allowed, I found myself walking toward the Manhattan Historical Library instead of another conference room. Olivia never questioned why I kept returning. She simply welcomed me with the same warm smile that had quietly become the brightest part of my week. One Saturday afternoon, after the library closed early for a community reading event, Olivia suggested we take a walk before the first snowfall arrived. We wandered through Central Park while bare branches stretched across a pale blue sky, and families gathered beside food carts enjoying the cool afternoon. Children laughed as they chased pigeons across the pathways. Musicians played gentle melodies beneath an old stone bridge, and the comforting aroma of roasted chestnuts drifted through the crisp air. Olivia stopped beside a small coffee cart and ordered 2 cups before I could offer to pay. When I reached for my wallet, she laughed softly and shook her head. "Today is my invitation," she said. "Next time can belong to you." I accepted the paper cup with an unfamiliar feeling of gratitude. No one had ever insisted on treating me as though I were simply another ordinary man standing in line for coffee. We continued walking beside the lake where sunlight shimmered across the calm water. Olivia spoke about her favorite childhood novels, the teachers who encouraged her to love literature, and the elderly librarian who had inspired her to choose this profession. Every memory she shared carried quiet appreciation instead of regret. Eventually, she looked toward me with gentle curiosity. "What did you enjoy before life became so busy?" The question caught me completely unprepared. I searched my memory before quietly answering. "I honestly do not remember." Olivia did not respond immediately. Instead, she smiled with understanding and pointed toward a small independent bookstore tucked beside a quiet street beyond the park. Inside, narrow wooden aisles overflowed with well-loved novels, handwritten staff recommendations, and shelves that leaned slightly beneath the weight of countless stories. The elderly owner greeted Olivia by name before welcoming me as though I had been visiting for years. We spent nearly an hour exploring forgotten classics and discussing favorite authors, without once mentioning business, responsibility, or reputation. Before leaving, Olivia selected a worn American novel and placed it into my hands. "Keep this until you find the person you used to be," she whispered. As we stepped back outside, the season's first snowflakes drifted gently through the afternoon light. I looked at the book, then at the woman walking quietly beside me, and realized something extraordinary had happened without either of us noticing. She had never asked me to become someone different. She had simply reminded me that beneath every title, every expectation, and every carefully guarded wall, there had always been an ordinary man waiting to remember how to truly live again. The first heavy snowfall arrived just before Christmas, covering Manhattan beneath a blanket of quiet white that softened every rooftop, every sidewalk, and every hurried thought. The library looked almost magical beneath strings of warm lights woven around its historic entrance. And inside, children gathered beside decorated bookshelves listening to holiday stories, while families searched for gifts hidden between the pages of beloved novels. I had visited so often that the librarians greeted me by my first name instead of my family name, and somehow that simple change meant more than any formal introduction ever had. One evening after the library closed, Olivia invited me to help carry several donated books to a small community reading room a few blocks away. The streets glowed beneath old-fashioned lanterns while fresh snow drifted gently through the cold air. We walked side by side without hurrying, each carrying a box filled with novels that would soon belong to children who had never owned books of their own. After the final delivery was complete, we stepped outside and paused beneath a quiet gazebo overlooking the East River. The city skyline shimmered beyond the water, reflected in thousands of tiny lights that danced across the surface like distant stars. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence no longer needed to be filled. It had become a place where both of us felt completely understood. After several peaceful moments, Olivia looked toward the river, before quietly asking, "Were you always this guarded?" Her voice carried only curiosity, never judgment. I rested my hands against the wooden railing and slowly exhaled. "No," I admitted. "When I was a boy, I believed people stayed because they cared. As I grew older, I learned many stayed because they expected something in return. After enough disappointments, it became easier to trust responsibility than emotion." I watched snowflakes disappear into the dark water below before continuing. Every achievement created another expectation. Every success built another wall. Eventually, I stopped wondering whether anyone actually wanted to know me. They only seemed interested in the man my family name represented. Olivia remained completely silent, allowing every word to exist without interruption. She did not rush to comfort me or search for the perfect response. She simply listened. That quiet understanding somehow encouraged me to keep speaking. Then I met someone who greeted the doorman with the same kindness she offered the chairman of a foundation. Someone who thanked every volunteer, remembered every reader, and never once asked what my influence could provide. I turned toward her, meeting the calm hazel eyes that had slowly become the safest place I had ever known. You never tried to change me. You only reminded me that I was allowed to become someone better. Olivia smiled gently, her eyes shining beneath the soft winter lights. People do not become extraordinary because someone rescues them, she whispered. They become extraordinary because someone believes they were always capable of choosing kindness. Those words settled deeper than anything I had ever heard. As we began walking back through the falling snow, I realized the walls I had spent a lifetime building had not been torn down by force. They had quietly disappeared one honest conversation at a time, until the lonely man hiding behind them finally remembered what it felt like to trust another heart completely. Christmas Eve arrived beneath a sky filled with slow drifting snow, and the city seemed quieter than I had ever known it. Manhattan glowed beneath countless white lights, but for the first time those lights no longer reminded me of success or reputation. They reminded me of home. Earlier that afternoon, the Manhattan Historical Library had hosted its annual holiday reading celebration. Families filled every corner of the building. Children laughed while listening to classic Christmas stories. Volunteers wrapped donated books with colorful ribbons, and warm cinnamon filled the air from fresh cookies prepared by neighbors who had supported the library for years. Olivia moved gracefully from one table to another, greeting every visitor by name whenever she could. Watching her, I finally understood something I had never learned inside boardrooms or grand estates. Influence could open doors, but kindness made people feel welcome enough to walk through them. After the celebration ended and the final families returned home, Olivia and I stepped outside into the peaceful evening. Fresh snow covered the sidewalks while the sound of distant church bells echoed gently across the city. We walked toward the small public square where a beautifully decorated Christmas tree stood surrounded by softly glowing lanterns. Neither of us hurried. Every quiet step somehow felt important. We stopped beside the tree as snowflakes settled across our coats. I looked toward Olivia, realizing there were no carefully prepared speeches capable of expressing everything she had changed inside me. "There is something I need to tell you," I said quietly. She smiled with patient curiosity. "I am listening." I drew a slow breath before speaking from the place that had remained frozen for most of my life. "When we first met, I believed I was offering you an opportunity by inviting you into my world. I was wrong. You never needed my world. It was mine that needed yours. Every conversation, every walk, every book you placed into my hands reminded me that life is measured by moments, not titles. I spent years believing love would distract me from responsibility. Instead, you showed me that love gives responsibility its greatest purpose." Olivia's eyes glistened beneath the soft holiday lights, but she allowed me to continue without interruption. "I do not want you to change your life for me," I whispered. "I do not want you to leave the library you love. I do not want you to become someone different because of my name. I only hope I can continue becoming the man I discovered whenever I am beside you." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she stepped closer and gently placed her hand in mine. "Nathan," she answered softly, "I never fell in love with your family name. I fell in love with the man who quietly thanked the maintenance employee, who borrowed books instead of pretending to know everything, who learned to smile without asking permission from the world. That man already belongs beside me." Snow continued falling around us while the lights of Manhattan shimmered beyond the square. I smiled more freely than I could ever remember, and together we began walking through the peaceful winter night. I realized I no longer feared tomorrow because I finally understood that I was not leaving my old life behind. I was carrying everything worthwhile into a future where love was no longer something to protect myself from, but the very reason every new chapter would be worth living. Spring arrived gently over Manhattan, painting the city with blooming cherry trees, clear blue skies, and the quiet promise that every difficult season eventually gives way to something beautiful. Several months had passed since the evening we stood beneath the Christmas lights and chose to walk toward the future together. Looking back, it was difficult to believe that everything had begun with a single rare book carried through the front doors of the Morelli estate. The Manhattan Historical Library remained exactly where it had always been, welcoming children searching for adventure, students chasing knowledge, and neighbors seeking a peaceful place to pause from the noise of the city. Olivia never left the library she loved, and I never asked her to. Instead, the Morelli Foundation expanded its partnership with community libraries across New York, restoring historic collections, funding literacy programs, and ensuring that every child, regardless of background, could discover the same love for books that had quietly transformed both of our lives. One bright Saturday morning, I arrived at the library carrying 2 cups of coffee from the small neighborhood cafe we had visited throughout the winter. Olivia looked up from arranging newly donated novels and smiled exactly the way she had smiled the first day we met, warm, sincere, and completely free of expectation. "You remembered," she said softly. I handed her the familiar paper cup before answering. "Some things are too important to forget." Together we spent the morning helping volunteers organize shelves, greeting families, and unpacking hundreds of donated books that would soon find new homes. Nobody treated me differently because of my family name. Children simply asked whether I could help them reach the highest shelves. Elderly readers thanked me for carrying heavy boxes. Volunteers laughed as we worked side by side. For the first time in my life, I understood how extraordinary ordinary moments could become. Later that afternoon, Olivia and I walked through Central Park where spring blossoms drifted gently across quiet pathways. We stopped beside the same lake where months earlier she had handed me a worn novel and reminded me that people were capable of changing. I reached into my jacket and carefully removed that very book. Inside the cover I had written only one sentence. "You never changed my heart. You simply taught me how to listen to it." Olivia read the words slowly before closing the book with a gentle smile. She looked toward the lake, then back at me, her hazel eyes reflecting the warm afternoon sunlight. "The best stories," she whispered, "are never about becoming someone else. They are about becoming who we were always meant to be." I quietly took her hand as families laughed nearby, and children chased blossoms across the grass. Around us the city continued moving with all its noise, ambition, and endless motion, yet none of it seemed capable of disturbing the peace we had finally found together. I once believed influence was the greatest inheritance a person could receive. I was wrong. The greatest inheritance is a heart willing to choose kindness every single day. Everything I thought I wanted had once filled the rooms of a magnificent estate, but everything I truly needed had been waiting inside a quiet neighborhood library, hidden between the pages of an ordinary book, carried there by an extraordinary woman who never stole my frozen heart because, without ever asking, she simply taught it how to beat again.